welcome to video 2 of Harness Racing Australia's Retraining the Standardbred Project. Hopefully you have watched video 1, which was our groundwork and backing video. We're now on to video 2. At the end of video 1, we had just mounted up and we were on board and ready to go. So this video we're going to cover off on your basic aids through the walk and the trot. We may touch on canter a little bit, but at this point in time, we've just got on and we want to make sure that we've got the foundations of that education really well established before we start moving on to the trickier stuff. So here we go, we're going to go on for video 2. Good boy. So in video 1 we went through some really basic groundwork in preparation for backing. I always like to make sure that we go through a really shortened version of that backing and groundwork stuff each time we get on in the first few weeks of their re-education. It just allows you a moment to ground them, to get their mind on the job, get your mind on the job, get the two of you working together. Chosen not to demonstrate it in this video. Go back to video 1 and run through all of those exercises really quickly. It shouldn't take you more than 5-10 minutes. It's just basically getting the horse's mind on the job. But for now, we're on board. Basic aids for a standardbred. Obviously, they're really well mouthed already if they've raced or at least been trained to race. But these things down here mean nothing to them. They've got no concept of a leg aid at this point in time. So the first thing that you really want to do is be able to establish the fact that a tap with your heel actually does mean go forward. The best way to do that with a standie is to take advantage of the fact that they have got some voice controls already installed in the form of a click or a walk on, whatever works for your horse, and being able to join that verbal aid with the leg aid at the same time. So the horse learns to associate the leg aid with something he already knows. Buck's a little bit further along in his training now than what we're demonstrating here in the video, but it's still really good to make sure that he's definitely working off of that leg aid. So what we want to do is just click, and at the same time, we're putting our leg on. And this is what we would do for the first couple of rides. It would be nothing more than just establishing that we've got to walk, stop, go. So leg on and the click at the same time. So being able to, at the start, make the click literally just a fraction of a second before you put the leg aid on. The idea being hopefully that he'll have started to step forward when you put the leg aid on, and you can join the two of them together. He begins to associate it in his mind very quickly. And again, stopping. At this point in time, your seat's not going to mean a lot to him either in terms of deepening the weight in the seat to ask for a downward transition. But obviously your reins are going to be the primary aid, as it should be. A lot of times you do get a little bit of confusion with a horse when he's not clear off the rein aids. So again, leg on and click. So you can see that Buck is actually reasonably well established now with this, and I can actually test that by halting him and then putting the leg on without the click. And that's when you start to know that you have actually got yourself a little bit of a leg aid happening. And it's important to be really clear at this point as well too, that you're not putting the accelerator on at the same time as the brake. Don't worry about their head carriage. You've not long backed them. The head carriage will come when they're balanced and working through. At this point in time, you want to make it very clear when there is a rein aid for halt, very clear with a leg aid to walk on. If you start to want to pull their mouths and move their heads around, you're going to muddy up the clarity of that transition, which is something you really don't want to do because, as I mentioned in the first video, all of this basic stuff on the ground and your first initial rides are the foundation work for everything else that you go on with later on in your standardbred's career. So you want to make sure that these are really clean. So at the moment we're just doing really nice big circles on the left rein. For most standies, not all, but most standardbreds, they do find the left rein a little bit easier. That's primarily the way that they race. Here in Australia, we only race to the left. And I believe there's only 1 or 2 tracks in New Zealand that race to the right. So a lot of their training work will often be to the left. So for now, we always start on that left rein just to try and make it as easy as we can for them. once you're reasonably confident that you have got a really clear stop off of a light aid and a really clear go off of a light aid, you can move on to trying to change the rein and seeing if he can do it the other way. It sounds silly, but often when you do change rein, you have to start over again, even though it's the same concept, just in a different direction. Some horses just don't quite understand when you change rein that it's still the same thing. So again, we're just doing nice big circles at the walk. We're lucky with Buck, his walk is quite clean. It doesn't have much of an amble or a pace to it. But again, that nice clear rein aid, and he halts, and we are wanting him to halt within the 3 beats. So again, going back to the groundwork that we did in video 1, we want him to halt cleanly and softly. We don't want him to jerk the reins forward and try to pull them out of our hands. That's a real standardbred thing. We don't want him to stop too abruptly either and drop you out the front of the saddle. So it's that nice, even, clean halt, square-ish, at least in front. We'll be happy with that for now. And again, associating the click just a fraction before the leg aid, and we want him to walk off. And again, we neither want him to barge forward really quickly or be sluggish. So it's about doing those transitions. It's as boring as, but it is the foundation to everything that you do going forward. If your horse can't walk and halt without reefing the reins out of your hands or without being really sluggish and taking 10 minutes to move, you're going to have a really hard time in trot and canter. I was hoping Buck might be naughty and reef the reins out of my hands so I could demonstrate something for you, but he's being very good, so I may demonstrate it anyway. But when they do want to take the reins out of your hands, you want to try and deepen that stop response. So we'll just halt him here. No, he's being very good. But what you would do is if he was trying to reef the reins out of your hands and pull forward, you actually deepen that stop response and ask him to rein back, which is just a pressure on the mouth. The minute he steps back, you take the pressure off. You don't need to take 50 steps backwards, but it's just a deepening of that stop response that, no, you won't take the reins out of my hands. We sort of half tried to do it. And again, we'll just step him back. Each time he steps back, we are taking the pressure off the reins. Till he goes backwards. Good boy. As I said earlier, golly, this wind isn't much fun. As I said earlier, I haven't got much of a contact with him. I've got a safe contact, but I am trying to sort of give him his head, let him find his own balance at this point. You don't want to have a loose rein necessarily. I know that some standardbreds, particularly the little chestnut that I did the Gary Owen on, MF Hollywood, you used to try and give him a loose rein as a reward for having done well, and he would actually get quite distressed because he thought you'd disappeared entirely off his back because he didn't associate your body weight with you being there. He associated your contact with his mouth, which I guess when you come from having a cart, the only contact you really have with your person is the reins. So do be aware of that. I do think that MF Hollywood was one out of the box, but just be cautious with giving them a really, really long rein because it can signify to them that you fell out of the cart, which is not quite the case, but nevertheless. So at this point, I am just trying to get him to soften a little bit with the contact. Just see whether he will just soften his jaw ever so slightly. And again, this is a really tricky thing with feel. The moment that he softens that jaw, you want to stop with the pressure of the reins. You don't necessarily throw the reins at him, but you do just stop asking him to soften because he has softened for you. So what we'll do again is we'll go through and we'll change rein. Now this is quite complicated for a standie in the early days. They will want to lean their shoulder and drop the shoulder forward and corner, not unlike a motorbike, I guess. So what you really want to do is make sure that you are nice and strong with your inside leg and try and get him to corner at least straight. At this point, flexion might be a little bit too much of an ask in terms of the correct flexion and the correct bend, but you at least want him to corner straight as opposed to cornering while he's leading with this inside shoulder. It's a racing thing, and you've got to get through your own mind the fact that this horse has spent a whole lot of time in between shafts. So bending his body and having his front legs and his back legs work separately from each other is a difficult concept for him to grasp in the first place. So just making sure that every time they want to lead with that inside shoulder, and you will find to the right it seems more prevalent, not always, but most of the standardbreds I've re-educated, it has been to the right. They want to dive inwards with that shoulder. So your inside leg is on the girth to keep them out. You can, even if you've got a crop with you, keep that pressed onto their shoulder or even tap on the shoulder. You can also lift that inside rein if it's really bad and just press it against their neck slightly. You've got levels when it comes to the aids. So start with just having the inside leg pressed against the girth and see how you go from there. So once we've established that we have got some leg aids from walk and hold, we can have a go at trotting. Again, I'm in an enclosed arena. It's quite a large space though. It's completely up to you and your own facilities and your own competency levels and the temperament of the horse that you're riding as to where you want to begin your trot work. I do often find though that if you are confident enough, they will find the trot work a hell of a lot easier in a bigger space. If you think about it, they're used to working on an 800 to 1,000 metre racetrack. If you're trying to ask them to trot in a 30 metre round yard, they may find that really hard. Obviously safety first, but that's where this walking and halting, making sure you've got your brakes well installed comes in handy, because that should be able to then help you in any situation. So we're on a nice big circle now, and we're just going to lighten the seat, click, and leg at the same time. Because once again, as I was saying earlier, we still got to establish that the leg is a go forward aid. Oh, we've got to have a little cough first. So again, I've started on the left rein. I've got a reasonably long rein, but I do have a contact with his mouth. You will find that if you start gripping their mouths for dear life, you've got them up short, they will stop or they will start to think that they're in a race type situation. As a general rule, when they're jogged, they're on a fairly long, loose rein in the cart. And then when they are asked to do their fast work or their race work, they're gathered up in the contact, so to speak. And so they will begin to associate a really strong inelastic contact with potentially racing, and that often means pacing. So if you can get away with a softer contact, you'll have a much more relaxed horse, and therefore a horse that's much more inclined to trot rather than pace. So again, I'm not asking for any form of a frame or a shape at this point. I'm just happy that he's trotting in a nice regular rhythm. And he's cornering without dropping that inside shoulder too much. At this point, I may not get perfect flexion around my leg, but I at least want him to go straight. We'll come back to a walk. And again, the seat's not going to mean much in your downward transition, but you begin to incorporate the seat with a really clear rein aid for your downward transition. Ooh, man. If you do have a particularly wily, clever old fellow like Buck, you will find at this point that you have to tighten your girth a hole or two. So excuse me while I do that. Good boy. So again, the leg and the click together. If it's walk on or whatever the special word is that you've started to establish with your horse, you'll find a click in most racing stables is a standard walk, trot, move forward type aid, so the click works most of the time. But again, we want the click with the leg and the lightened seat. Good boy. And he steps off really nicely into a trot. Now, if you have got a standie that's more inclined to want to pace, you've got a couple of options here, and there is a couple of schools of thought around this. I'm teaching you what works for me and what has worked for me. And I find that treating the pace a little bit like a vice works. It's very natural for a standardbred to pace. It's very natural for a horse to buck or kick or shy, and all of those vices. And I like to keep in my mind that the pace is a vice that I don't want him to demonstrate. That doesn't mean I'm going to punish him, though, but all I'm going to do is basically delete it out of his repertoire every time he exhibits that particular vice. In this case, it's the pace. So if he happens to amble off, I tend not to try and ride them through that. A lot of people will ride them through. I would prefer to try and calmly bring them to a downward transition and try and ask again, and see if you can step off really cleanly. Now, there's two reasons for that. Of course, first, as I was saying, I like to try and delete the pace out of his repertoire as early as I can and as low in the chain as I can. So that means in the walk. But secondly, if you do manage to establish a trot out of an ambling sort of transition, you're going to have to go back and clean up your transitions at a later stage, because you'll find that the horse finds it much easier to roll into a trot. And conversely, he'll probably roll from the trot into the walk with an ambling sort of rolling gait. And what we really want to achieve is a really clean walk to trot and trot to walk. So my advice to you, it's hard to demonstrate because Buck from day one actually really has shown a great tendency to trot as opposed to pace. But if I pull him up into a short frame here, I may be able to get him tense enough to roll, but I don't think so. No, he's going to trot anyway. He's a good boy. Oh, careful. But yeah, what I would suggest in those instances is very calmly, don't drag them back. A tense standardbred will pace. I can't stress that enough. There's no point in getting upset with them. There's no point in getting annoyed. They're only doing what they've been taught to do and what's in their blood. So you've got to have a little bit of patience in the early days with the fact that you're changing everything that they know, and everything that they've been told is wrong is suddenly right, and everything they've been told is right is suddenly wrong. It's a big change, but you've got the standardbred nature on your side, that they love to please and they love to try hard. So what we'll do now, we'll have one more trot to the left, and we'll see that we can change rein and go to the right. Good boy. Good boy. Now with the rein change, what you may find is that they want to dive down onto that new rein with that shoulder. See, I'm sort of letting Buck do it. It's probably very difficult to see on the video. But without that inside rein an inside leg to balance him, he wants to lead with this inside shoulder. And he wants to dive down and dive forward. And that's something that he's learnt as a racehorse. As a racehorse, you develop a lot of pulling muscles. You dive forward into the breastplate and drag yourself with your front legs. And what we, of course, want to do is completely the opposite, is that we want him to actually sit back and drive from behind. So once again, we're turning his world upside down a little bit here. So we've got to have a bit of patience about it. So again, I've got that inside leg, just pushing him around this corner. Got my inside rein a little bit lifted against his neck. It's probably difficult to see on the video. This arena does have a little bit of a downhill slant. Buck certainly notices that. So the flatter an area that you can work on, the better, particularly in the early days. Good boy. So again, we've got a nice flowing trot. We're just interested in him going straight and not diving around these corners. So putting your weight back in the saddle, inside leg, inside hand, little whip on the shoulder, holding it there, not hitting him, but holding it. We're going to change rein, getting the new inside leg to push him around the corner and stop him diving down and counter bending and counter flexing. Counter flexion is really natural as a racehorse. It helps them corner at speed, but it's the enemy of trying to get your canter later on. So it's really important at the walk and trot that we try and get them at least straight, if not in good, correct flexion and correct bend around the corners. Good boy. Once you think you've got your trot fairly well established on a bigger circle, your next step, of course, is going to be to see if you can spiral them in and out of some slightly smaller circles. Through changing your rein, you're already sort of doing that, but this time you just want to stay on that left rein and keep going around. Good boy. And each time you're sort of taking him just that little bit further in off the track to try and see that you can get him to go smaller and smaller in a nice spiral, nice and calm. And the horse will tell you how comfortable he is or isn't with the size of the circle that you're trying to put him on. But again, that inside leg and that inside rein. Good boy. Good. Good boy. And then back out onto the bigger circle. Good boy. So you can see naturally here that as we've started to go through the work, Buck's naturally not sticking his head out as much. He's starting to sit down in the bridle a little bit more. I'm not asking for that again at this stage. That's really not the aim of this game at this point in time. The aim of the game is to get them comfortable working in the smaller area and to get them light and on your aids. Good boy. Now what I'm doing here today, you would probably need to stretch over a couple of weeks worth of work. I'm trying to fit in a number of different exercises over quite a short period of time, and I am lucky Buck is a little bit further along in his training, but this is exactly what we did with him. Good boy. So once we've got some light aids walking and trotting, we can do some smaller circles and bigger circles, spirals like I just demonstrated, but you also want to try and get some transitions within the trot itself. Doesn't have to be huge, but you just want to be able to click and tap with your legs and instigate a slightly bigger stride, and conversely sit up, close your hands on the reins and get a slightly smaller stride out of him. Now, the downward transition is always going to be harder for the standie. They're going to want to walk, they might pace, but being able to get them to demonstrate a few different trots. Good boy. Close the reins, close your hands, sit up and slow him down, getting a little bit of elasticity in the trot. It actually helps them to understand that they don't just bore along at 50 k's an hour forever and ever. Good boy. Good boy. And you will find that doing these transitions between the different trots helps them not only to be more responsive to your aids, but to develop the quality of the trot as well. We'll change rein and we'll just have a look at this same exercise on the right rein, which is always the harder rein for buck in particular. Good boy. And coming back. Good boy. Good boy. See, now he wants to walk there because it's quite hard to trot slowly. So again, you're building strength and building muscles that he has never had to use before. I always tell people that I teach that it's a little bit like you have walked and run everywhere. But I'm telling you now, you have to skip everywhere. Well, it's fine, you can skip, but not long before you start to get really tired, because skipping's not what you do. So you've got to be conscious of the fact that these horses will get tired at some point or another. And to be able to give them, some rest breaks in between, where again, you give them a longer rein, maybe don't throw the reins at them, as I mentioned earlier, but give them a longer rein. They may take it down and forward, they may not. The aim is that you do want them to take it down and forward and have a stretch, but this is still a foreign concept to them. Good boy. So, but your walk breaks don't have to be nothing breaks, where you're just flopped in the saddle and the horse is everywhere. You can use your walk breaks constructively by doing the same exercise that we did before in the trot, whereby you're asking for a little bit more in the walk. You don't want them to trot, but you just want a really nice active stride. And again, closing your seat, closing your hands, shortening those strides, and then walking them back out again. Good boy. So he's really on your aids. And of course, the walk is where I would introduce some lateral work as well too. So being able to introduce the lateral work to begin with is a really great concept for the standies. As I was saying earlier, the standardbreds have been in shafts their whole lives. Their hind legs have to follow their front legs. They don't have many options. So being able to teach them a little bit of lateral work, get them to just step over and cross their legs slightly, suddenly they begin to open up a whole new world to them, because they're like, wow, my legs operate independently of each other. This is fantastic. So the lateral work, the standies find it interesting, and it's a good way to give them a break without really giving them a break, to mix it up a little bit. I will try and come towards the camera and do a little bit of a leg yield for you, which might be a little bit tricky because I have got a mounting block in the way. Good boy. So we'll just walk on. I'm just going to put this right leg on. No, we're going to stop entirely. There we go. Good boy. We may have to change our ideas on where we film lateral work. So what I will do is I'll come along the long side, or up the centre line. Good boy. Now again, like anything that you are teaching them, one stride first is all you're asking for. I've got my outside leg on. He steps across with the hind leg, and I stop asking. As I said, Buck's already learnt this, so he likes to show off. Forward. Good boy. One step over and release. Good boy. Like I said, at the beginning, this is going to be messy. All you're looking for is that they will move away from your leg. Don't try and do all of this on the first day. As I said earlier, I'm trying to fit in a couple of weeks worth of work in the space of this one video. So we want to not necessarily throw all of this at the horse on the first day, but I am trying to give you a few options. You work first on getting him off the aids, then you think about starting to introduce this lateral work and some other stuff. So again, I've got my outside leg. Good boy. Good boy. Sometimes they might want to stop because they'll be confused. You do want them to stay going forward. It's not just a step sideways, it's a step forward and sideways. So you can see my outside leg. You've got to try and work your timing so that your tap happens when that leg that's crossing over is up in the air, and you can influence the movement of that leg. Good boy. There's no point in putting that leg on and giving him that tap when the leg's stationary and parked on the ground. They can't influence the movement of it when it's parked on the ground. We'll try one more. As you can see, Buck gets a little bit tense doing this, but it's why you stay really calm, don't get upset with him. Outside leg on, and he crosses over. He finds it a little bit more difficult this way. So you can see he wanders a bit. He doesn't want to use this hind leg to go over. So you tap, tap, tapping until you get the leg, and you release the pressure the minute that leg crosses over. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. That's the job. That's the job. Good man. So we've begun to establish our walk and trot transitions. We're trying to make them nice and clean and make sure that we've got any pacing or ambling deleted as soon as we can. Calmly, of course. Once again, I can't reiterate enough, a 10 standardbred will pace. So no getting upset with them, no getting upset with yourself. You just need to take your time with it. It may take a week, it may take a month. Every horse is a little bit different. We've been very lucky with Buck. He's come together really quickly, but he still has his days. So you've got to be prepared for the fact that as you work through some of the exercises here, that you've got to be prepared for the fact the wheels will fall off one thing while you're working on another, and be confident that they will all come back at some point. Good boy. So we've got our walk trot transitions, we've begun our lateral work, we've begun transitions within the walk and trot to try and create some elasticity and some variance within the trot gait and the walk gait. That will help you later on when you're trying to establish a medium trot and a lengthened trot, because the concept of asking for a little bit more and asking for a little bit less isn't unusual to them. And again, as those weeks go by, beginning to just shorten your contact and ask them to soften the jaw in between some of your other exercises, you'll find the horse will start to naturally come round in the correct fashion, where he's walking and working from behind, as opposed to you just jagging on his mouth and pulling his head down on the ground, which unfortunately I see in every discipline with every breed of horse. It's not quite the way that you want to do it. So we've gone through quite a lot today. Like I said, and I've said it a few times now, we don't necessarily want to go through all of the exercises that I've shown you today on the first day or even the first week. But they're designed to sort of get you through the first couple of weeks of that re-education and retraining journey to getting them on the aids, nice and clean, trying to delete any of the pace. Again, that's going to depend entirely on the individual horse. Some of them are very pacey, some of them are less so. But hopefully these first few exercises have got you on your way to getting your standie retrained. So we've gone through groundwork and backing in video 1. We've gone through your basic aids in the walk and trot here in video 2. So we're going to wrap it up here today for video 2 now. You've walked, you've trotted. I would spend a little bit of time working on those exercises and having them really, really perfect before you work on your canter work. And that's what we're going to introduce to you in video 3. So thanks for watching. Thanks for spending some time with us. I hope that you take a little bit away from these videos. I'm certainly enjoying trying to pass on the info that I've gained over a long time of re-educating horses. And we'll see you in video 3 for canter. Good boy.